Hello, and welcome to episode 4 of the Forensicsworld podcast. My name's Will Dodds. I'm a retired crime scene investigator / forensic specialist with 15 years experience in the discipline and overall a 22-year policing career in the books. Thanks for listening and following along with the podcast. Our last episode talked about career pathing, and I received quite a bit of positive feedback from that, especially from those of you who are considering CSI and forensics as a career. Feel free to re-listen to that one because there's a lot of good ideas and good tips for you there. Anyways, today we're going to talk about trace evidence, and trace evidence can play an important part in a forensic investigation depending on the circumstances. So trace evidence, how do we define it? Well, I would, in a sentence, I guess, it's evidence that cannot be seen or very difficult to be seen with the naked eye, and you need to use technology in order to locate it at scenes, forensic light sources, perhaps microscopes in the lab, something along those lines. Examples of trace evidence, these include hair, fibers from cloth, pieces of glass, blood, biologicals, in some cases soil, paint chips, and even something like GSR or gunshot residue. And these can all be considered to be trace evidence. Now, what can trace evidence do for you as a forensic investigator? Well, trace evidence can be transferred between people, between objects, to and from the environment. It really helps with linking someone or something to a scene. You can potentially link a suspect and a victim and a victim of a crime to a scene or to each other using trace evidence. And trace evidence can also help you to reconstruct what may or may not have happened during an episode or a crime. And certainly it could also be used to confirm that perhaps someone wasn't at a crime scene in particular. You can't talk about trace evidence without getting into Locard's exchange principle. Sir Edmund Locard, he passed away in 1966, but his exchange principle is one of the more concrete forensic principles that we follow in the discipline. It's basically saying every contact leaves a trace. And a little more specifically, the perpetrator of a crime is going to bring something to the crime scene and leave with something from it every single time. And this principle suggests that we just need to look hard. We just need to look hard enough. When we think there's nothing, we just need to look a little bit harder. Linking, using trace evidence to link items. Well, certainly paint transfer, that can help to link a vehicle to another vehicle or a vehicle to a hit and run, something along those lines. Fibers from clothing found on a suspect. Well, they could link that suspect to a victim simply through these fibers. A gunshot residue, GSR. Well, a GSR, which is typically found most commonly on the hands, forearms, and even face of the shooter, can link or can suggest that this suspect had actually discharged a firearm in the relatively recent past. Could potentially link them to a homicide. Hair, same thing. You could find hairs basically anywhere, and even if you hug someone, there's a very good chance that you're going to have some transfer of trace evidence between you and that person. It's a challenge at times to find that trace. And the other challenge too as well, which is always in the back of our minds, is that trace actually related to the crime and those who participated in the crime? And we all know that the closer we look at any surface or any scene, there's trace evidence literally everywhere. Everywhere. Let me give you an example potentially. You've got a murder victim or a homicide victim that's been tied up using a nylon rope or a rope of some sort. And that rope has now been removed from this victim. And you're wanting to connect that rope to the victim. How are you going to do it? What's the potential trace that's going to be able to connect those two items together? Well, certainly you may find fibers from the rope embedded in the skin or the wrists of the victim. And you also might find some DNA transfer that came from the victim that is now embedded in the rope itself. Another possibility as well, the person who tied the knots could have left their DNA behind on that rope. And potentially fibers from that rope could be found on the suspect. And I've been in situations where we have found DNA or trace evidence on rope that was used to tie up a victim. So it's an amazing potential there. Something else to think about. How about a home invasion where you've got a suspect who is wearing a hood and covering their face, so the victim, may or may not have any idea who this person was, but certainly not by looking at them would you be able to tell. And then police find the hood tossed not far from the scene on the ground. Well, this hood is actually potentially filled with trace evidence in the form of DNA, saliva, hair, potentially fibers from the hood transferred to the suspect. The possibilities are really and truly endless. Let's think about a stabbing, perhaps. You have a knife that's used to stab a victim, and that knife is wiped off, so they think, and you find the knife and you decide, I'm going to examine this for trace. And what could you possibly find? Well, you could find blood. You could find hair in the mechanism if it's a folding knife, skin, tissue, fibers. It's truly endless what the possibilities are. So the key to success with trace evidence is not only locating it, but actually collecting it. And when you're talking about, let's talk about hair, perhaps. Hair, when you're collecting hair, there's possibilities of you could use tape. You could use a forensic vacuum that has a filter that would catch any trace evidence that is drawn into the vacuum through its suction mechanism. And of course, using a forensic light source is going to help you to locate that hair and use that for potential evidence in the case. Now, what kind of analysis do you do of hair? Well, you can decide, is it animal, is it human, where is it from on the body, and there's a difference in hair from different parts of the body. You could potentially identify some dyes, and interestingly enough, you can get a feel for someone's historical drug use by analyzing their hair shaft. And as most of us are familiar with, that if you have a follicle with the hair, you can get some DNA from that hair. fibers. So when you're collecting fibers, again, you're going to use basically the same type of process or tools as you would with hair. So tape, vacuum, using a light source. And now what are you going to do with that fiber? You're going to analyze it. Maybe it's looking for a particular color, the presence of a dye. Where did that fiber come from? Is it a synthetic fiber, a natural fiber? Any number of the top possibilities. Another common piece of trace that is collected is glass. And again, collecting trace, once you locate it, using light, using other forensic aids, you're looking at tweezers, vacuum, flashlight. Careful collection and then careful storage. You can decide, type of glass. Is it tempered glass? Is it plate glass? Then you can analyze further. If the pieces are from, say, plate glass or even tempered glass, you could analyze that glass for another level of trace, biologicals and blood. Maybe there's a shoe impression or a potential partial fingerprint on a piece of glass. You just never know. Paint. Again, you're looking to collect paint chips or pieces of paint from transfer. Blue isn't just blue. There are so many different blues, and you can, if the situation dictates it, have that paint analyzed to determine if there is truly a match between one piece of evidence and another piece of evidence found in two different locations, to try and connect the two. Gunshot residue, GSR, we talked about that briefly. And again, it just connects someone to have been firing or handling a firearm within the recent past. And we'll talk a little bit about shooting reconstruction in another podcast, but just know that GSR, you could maybe see some flecks, or it looks like pepper on someone's skin, but GSR in many situations is not really visible to the naked eye. Now, wanted to make sure I brought up a really important aspect to gathering trace, and it's when you're gathering trace from bodies or pieces of larger evidence, and that's just the use of brown paper. And when you're analyzing or examining any type of evidence, be it clothing be it a body, be it brush, and I'll talk about that in a second. Whenever you're doing that type of work, you want to make sure you're doing it over top of some brown paper, some rolled out paper. And why is that? I think it's pretty clear why that would be important, because that paper is going to be able to catch any evidence that falls from your exhibit onto the floor. It reminds me of a choice that we had to make at a homicide, a body dump homicide, and we had actually, we'll talk about two of them. And the task at each homicide was the same. We had brush and branches and brambles and stuff that we had to examine for trace. In one case, we did the trace examination of the brush at the scene. In the other case, we collected the brush from the scene and brought it back to our office, back to the garage, and then we examined it at the office. Now, you could think of pros and cons to either one of these options for sure. Now, examining for trace at the scene, well, we used portable forensic light sources, a portable laser examination device, and we spent quite a long time during twilight hours as the sun was going down using our forensic light sources to look at all of the branches and the brambles and the vegetative surfaces that felt that the body may have come in contact with, in order to search for trace evidence. And we had success. We found hairs, we found fibers, we found quite a bit of trace, and some of it was victim related, some of it was of no use for DNA analysis. Some of it we used from the fiber side to get a feel for, potentially a color of clothing, that type of thing, of who else may have been involved. But we weren't counting on the trace to solve the problem, solve the crime, but certainly the trace evidence was an interesting aspect to the forensic investigation. So we did have some success locating trace evidence at a scene. Is it ideal? In some cases it's necessary. In some cases it's not realistic. You can't bring an obscene amount of vegetation back to your office when you can maybe bring the office, in a sense, to the scene. Now, the other case, as I was saying, I collected garbage bags filled with branches, brambles, etc., from a scene, and brought it all to the garage, laid down the brown paper, and went through each branch one at a time, going through each one, looking for trace. And again, similar to the last example, located hairs, located a whole bunch of stuff, and certainly some of it not related to the incident, but certainly some of it was. Now, it's sort of a catch-22, because if you're examining stuff at a scene in the bush, you could miss something. You certainly could. There's just no doubt about that. But at the same time, if you bring brush or branch work, leaves, etc., back to your office, you could lose evidence during the collection and transport of that evidence. So each situation is going to be a little bit different from depending on your circumstances. Let's have a couple of questions from our followers. Question here: Is there always trace evidence at a crime scene? Well, I can answer that in a word, and I'm going to say yes. However, there's decisions that have to be made at every crime scene. How much evidence do you need? How deep into this do you need to go? And is it really and truly necessary to find trace evidence in every situation? The answer to that is no. There's no cookie-cutter approach to investigating a crime scene. And certainly, if you're at a break and enter and you find blood at the point of entry, do you have to now go further and look for hairs and look for other possible trace? I'm going to suggest to you no. The blood is the jackpot there, and that's the DNA, potential DNA, that you're going to be able to use to identify a potential suspect for this crime. So, is there always trace? Yes. Do you always need to collect it? No. Another question: how do you preserve and protect trace evidence on a body? This is a great question, and it came up, relatively frequently when we're dealing with deceased persons, especially homicides, potential homicides. Decision has to be made. Do you want to do it at the scene, or do you want to do it later? Sometimes the environment is such that doing it at the scene is just not realistic, and it's just not the most efficient or not going to be the best way to collect that trace evidence. If it's the case where you want to do it at the scene, you can use forensic light sources. You can examine the body. You can do what you need to do on the outer layer of clothing. Keep that in mind at the scene. No problem. Collect your evidence, store it in appropriate containers, and deal with it later. If you're deciding, nope, I'm going to do this back away from the scene. Basically, we're going to do this at autopsy. And that's when you're going to have the next contact with the body. So the key there is securing the body. So what often is used if a brand new shroud, it's a zip-up shroud is what I'm familiar with, and it was a one-time use only. Unzip the shroud, leave the victim fully clothed, just as is, and while gloved up, of course, slowly, carefully lift the body into the shroud, zip it up, secure it, seal it, done. So you know that nothing is coming out of that shroud until you open it again at autopsy. Now, we'll have another discussion about what happens at an autopsy at a later date, and very interesting sequence of events, that's for sure. One thing to remember if you're taking a body from the scene for later trace examination is have a look at the scene after you've moved the body, and specifically underneath the body, because you can't put brown paper under the body before you move it, and you're only going to want to move it once. So when that body goes up and into the shroud, it's now secure. It can be removed by the body service, and then you spend some time examining where that body was. Check the floor, check the bed, check wherever it was. While I think about it, so the body is put into the shroud, the brand new one-time use only shroud, and then that body is placed in another body bag. So there's 2 layers. And it gets delivered to the morgue, where it's put under ice for a while, and until we can autopsy it, and it's examined at autopsy, and trace evidence can be gathered then using all the techniques we've talked about before. So trace evidence, very important, can be very important, is something that is not always looked for, not always necessary, but truly it's going to always be there. So I think we'll wrap it up for this particular episode. Like to sort of keep them around 20 plus minutes or so. And I appreciate everyone listening. It'd be great to get a like, a comment, a follow, and we will talk to you again soon for episode number 5. Thanks for listening, and until next time, I invite you to follow Forensicsworld on Instagram, and to remember the theme, learn something today, and we will talk again soon.